think back to when No Man's Sky started, and it was a really long time ago now, actually, when I look back. It's 8 years, I think, right? We started Hello Games about like 10 years ago, and kind of just setting out as a small indie studio. And we made this game called Jet Danger, which kind of came to PSN, PS3 at the time. But then in my spare time, I started working on this mad project. We called it Skyscraper at the time, and it's what basically became No Man's Sky. And at the time I said really probably, pretentious things, of like, I want you to have the feeling of landing on an alien planet for the first time or whatever, right? Feel like you've stepped, into the cover of like a sci-fi novel. That was kind of the aesthetic and the emotion that we were going for. But at the time it was just this crappy little tech demo that I had put together. But yeah, that's where it started. And then after a while of that, the rest of the team started joining me. A year after that we announced, and 3 years after that we came out. I was really happy with it at the time, really proud of it actually, that it felt like it matched a vision that we had in our head, right? And that vision was actually to feel some weird emotions that I don't think you normally feel in games, to feel a little bit lonely when you land on a planet, to feel a little bit unnerved kind of walking around and exploring. And that resonated really well with some people, and it's kind of a polarizing idea, kind of a niche idea. It was the sort of sci-fi that I'd grown up with from like the 60s and 70s. Not that I'd grown up in the 60s and 70s, but that was the kind of stuff I was reading when I was a kid, right? Reading Dune and things like that, and watching watching 2001: A Space Odyssey too many times. And that was my kind of sci-fi. And we wanted to do things that were totally different to the games that were out there at the time. Something a bit ambitious and also a bit innovative, I look at it now and I think probably finally, like some of those pretentious ideals that we had, or some of the thoughts that we had in our head are starting to feel like real things, are starting to come true, But since the game has released, we've always had this roadmap in our minds of cool features that we wanted to add, things that would allow other types of people to enjoy the game, right? So we have those people who were the original kind of explorers who went and enjoyed the game for that experience. But now we have people who are like base builders, and they just spend all of their time building crazy things on planets, right? There's this whole group of people who just build fast food outlets on planets. I don't really understand it, but it's a thing that happens a lot, right? We've added story and missions. We've added a bunch of things that are, I guess, classed as more traditional gameplay elements, but with our own weird twist on it, When the game came out, we had a crazy reaction to it. I mean, we were this tiny team. The average size of Hello Games was about 6 people when we were making No Man's Sky, whereas, most game teams are 400, 600 people, that kind of thing, making AAA games. So we were really, really small. And we were not ready for the craziness that followed, right? The number of people that we had playing. We were kind of one of the best-selling new games of this generation. It's pretty nuts, for us to deal with that. And we had feedback from everywhere, right? And it was intense, dramatic time. And we always knew that the game would be a little bit polarizing, maybe not necessarily for everyone, right? At that point, we knew we were making something weird and a bit innovative. We were fine with that. We just never expected so many people to play it. But it's been really interesting watching that. And yeah, we've got this really diverse set of people. And now there is no one true vision, for the game, right? Like when I look at it as the kind of ideas we have always had in our heads, but also, I suppose those ideas were painted in huge, big brush strokes, right? Like we've got a big roller and we're like painting a wall, And then watching the community and how they interact with it it makes us want to come back with like little small brushes and kind of fill in all the detail, right? And paint more detail and more depth into various areas. You know, it's really kind of a little bit humbling and also super interesting to watch people engage with the game and kind of adjust your vision along those lines. I think that's so important. We probably could have brought out the game and then not done anything else afterwards. In a way, maybe that would have made sense, right? We haven't charged for any of our updates, so, you know, maybe this has been a terrible idea, right? But for us, it wasn't really altruistic, you know? I would love to say that it was and pretend that it was, but we could see something that other people couldn't, right? At launch, we could see that every day people were logging in and playing, right? The average person was playing for about 25 hours and they just wanted more, you know? And it's a bit overwhelming as a small team to kind of deal with that, but it's not the worst problem in the world, right? It's kind of cool that this idea that really for me and a lot of the team we've had since we were kids, you know, wanting to make this kind of game, to know that people like it, that's quite an enticing idea. So we were really excited about the idea of updating it. So Beyond is quite a big update. It's our largest update to date for No Man's Sky. And we've done some pretty large updates. So Next was really big. It introduced multiplayer and freighters and expanded base building a lot. And at the time, we kind of thought this is probably our last big idea for the game. And we'll probably do smaller updates, which was no bad thing. We thought that would actually keep the community happier in some ways. And then we were working on 3 separate updates that we were going to release separately. And each of the 3 of them started getting bigger and bigger. Just because the people working on them got excited and dragged in more ideas and stuff. And then worse still, you know, those teams started kind of interleaving those features, right? And kind of making those things work together. And then were showing me like, look how cool this is if you put this and this together. I could just see it. I was like, oh, here we go again. You know, we're making a big update. So you could just see the impact that it could have and how interesting it could be. So we wanted to take a step back from it, look at the game as a whole, bring in new features, but also make the whole thing kind of work a bit better together. So that's the idea behind Beyond, is that it's these 3 key kind of updates that combine into one bigger whole. So one thing that's really cool is virtual reality. That's one of the big strands of this. And that is the whole game, you know, which is this long form experience that you can play for 1,000 hours or whatever, working in VR, which is really exciting. You can take your save and just put on a headset, you know, even if you've got 500 hours on your save, and just put on a headset and continue from there. You can switch back and forth between them. And we've taken the entire game, all the different ways to kind of interact with it, all the different control methods, and made the game work with those. So, and we've tried to make it feel native, you know, as if it was made for VR, which is really hard. It's a really big challenge, right? So when you get in your ship, you can grab the joystick, you can grab the throttle, you know, and kind of fly your ship for real, you know. To get out of the ship, you kind of grab a handle at the side and pull up in the cockpit. There's a niceness as well, a lot of the user interface, because we're a science fiction game, we've kind of brought a lot of the user interface into the game, so you kind of look at your wrist, kind of like a watch on your wrist, and kind of interact with the game there. You know, and we just want it to feel like a very full, complete VR experience. So that's one strand, which on its own would be a good update in itself, I think, right? But then also there's No Man's Sky Online, which is another strand of this, where we've increased the player cap. We've added kind of a social space where everyone can go, the Nexus, or they can go and meet each other, play together, join together in groups and go off and do missions. You can also kind of summon it in at any time, the Nexus, and just fly into it, no loading screen, and just see other players. But also go to the teleporter, which is in there, and go and visit other people's planets, other people's bases, their kind of favorite areas that they found and marked, which is really nice. And it's just cool to start missions with people and kind of make friends, whereas before, if you wanted to play multiplayer, you needed to have, 3 other friends who own No Man's Sky and who happen to be online at the same time and all of that kind of thing. This kind of frees up a lot of that ability to just play multiplayer and have those experiences. So it can still be quite a, austere, lonely experience if you want it to be, and go and play and have that science fiction kind of experience. But just like most good sci-fi, you can come back to this, effectively the space station, the kind of meeting point, and come back to the Nexus and see all these other players and share stories and cool stuff you've got on and whatever. And then the other kind of strand of this is actually a whole load of other features that we class under the heading version 2.0, right? So we're bumping the version number up to 2.0, which is significant for us, just because we're kind of saying this is a really nice milestone for us, right? We're adding a lot of features, actually more than were in Next, which in itself was a really impressive update, I think. And we're bringing them all together into cohesive whole. So we have crazy things. We have, creature riding, we have creature farming and milking. We have, NPCs that kind of just walk around now, and you can come across them on planets. We have a new alien language system. We have base building, where you have industrial parts, so you can build like, kind of silos. You can build mineral extractors. You can build, solar generators, that kind of thing, and just play a completely different type of game, right? That is much more industrial and kind of much more about making money, which some people really, really care about in No Man's Sky. There's a power system and logic system which allows you to build crazy things within the kind of base building area. So you can build like your own little version of Rocket League or something like that. You've got physics spawners and triggers and wiring and logic. You can build your own little computer or whatever you want, right? If you're an explorer, there's a whole load of features that kind of back that stuff up. So it's just about taking a lot of the key ways that people play the game right now and making them deeper, kind of painting in that finer detail for them. Making No Man's Sky and making something procedural, there's just no way we can go back. We have seen the power of that. To be able to click a button and make a planet is so cool, to have that power. The cool thing for us is just the freedom it allows us, and it takes off a lot of constraints in terms of our ideas. We can have slightly more ambitious ideas, as a small team. No Man's Sky is this like infinite procedurally generated universe, which most games aren't. This is not a thing that people think about generally when they play the game. They kind of think of it like a normal game. But for me, it's super obvious, and for the rest of the team here, it's super obvious that it brings a whole set of difficulties. When you boot up the game, I don't know how far away you are going to be from the health that you need or the resources that you need to survive on that planet, right? I don't know whether there's going to be a hill in the way or a mountain or a cave, or whether you're going to start off, in the middle of nowhere or right beside another building, or, whether you'll meet an NPC 5 minutes into the game or 5 hours into the game, right? And also, we don't have most games, this might not be obvious when you're playing them, but most games, at least for the first hour, are a set of closed off areas that slowly open out. For us, we have all sorts of craziness. We have people who never leave the first planet and go and play for like 100 hours, right? We have people who, just do nothing but travel. and they just completely ignore the tutorial or whatever, and we try to redirect them and they're just like, nah, that's not what I'm doing. And so we like that. It brings a whole set of challenges, but we like it. When you boot up the game, you are on a random planet. So we have to deal with a lot of stuff like, we don't know what you're going to see day one, what other creatures are going to be there. Are you going to, spawn next to something that's going to kill you straight away? So in terms of game design, it's a bit of an odd one, but also just technically, we can't test every possible scenario. Something that we've gotten a lot better at, but when we launch an update and we have millions of people playing, as we've been lucky enough to have our last few updates, we don't know what they're going to see, and so it's a bit scary. But really, it's just a cool technical challenge to do that, and we have to design in a very different way. There's much more of a sandbox, and we kind of have to lean into that. We have to basically equip the player with tools rather than, to use that kind of classic analogy of we have to teach someone how to fish rather than giving them fish. We have to teach them how to interact with the world, and we try to do that as best as possible, and they can ignore that if they want. But it feels, I think people often don't put their finger on why, but it feels different as a game when you pick up and play No Man's Sky compared to a lot of other games for that reason. They mightn't realize that that's why, but that is why it feels a lot more open and a lot less hand-holdy, I think. It's one of those rare games that I can talk to people who don't play games at all and explain it to them and kind of say, oh, it's a whole universe and you can just go and explore and do all of these sci-fi things, right? That's something that everyone can kind of understand, and a lot of people have said, and I don't know whether they mean it in a good way or a negative way, they've kind of said it sounds like the game design that a child would make, right? And I think it is. I take it as a compliment. I think that's fine. Because I think actually so many of our fans have said this, and so many of the team would say this. This is the kind of game that they've wanted to make since they were kids, or the kind of game that they wanted to play. Most of us had played, just some 2D side scroller when we were kids and thought, why can't I just go through that wall or go out that door or get in a spaceship and fly off or whatever, right? Not wanting those boundaries. So I guess a lot of us have had that idea in our mind, and it wasn't just my idea, it's something that we as a team have talked about for years, It just required a certain level of stupidity to launch into that, to think it was an idea we should actually pursue. In our heads, that meant it was very niche, and it would appeal to a certain type of, nerd like myself, and maybe not the rest of the world, right? So it was really surprising that from the moment we announced, it seemed to be a game that really got people excited, So it's been a really weird journey, but it's been a really interesting one. And we keep kind of adding more to it, and then almost like pulling back a layer and finding that there's another layer underneath that gets us excited, and then pulling that back and then realizing there's more underneath that gets us excited, So it's not a big hardship with this huge universe to kind of think of things that would be cool to put in it,
For the players.